I am Tom Copadis, and I'm 83 years of age.
How many years have you lived in Deering?
Actually, all my life. I didn't become a resident until the 70s, when I was asked to be on the trust funds, and you had to be a resident. So I became a resident, a legal resident.
But you spend a lot of time here?
Oh, from the time I was a baby in this house. I would come up from 1952, I started spending most of my summers up here with my grandparents. Because before that, I used to spend half my summers here and half the summers at Hampton Beach with my Greek grandparents. But I liked up here more than I wanted to.
What was there to do in the summer here?
There were cattle here, the barn. Could play outdoors. You know, we did things at the time where our parents would be arrested today. Because my cousin and I, Peter, wanted to see the noise of a big tree falling. So we went out into the pasture, and there was this big, big tree, and we worked on it for 2 weeks, chopping and sawing, and we were ready for the next day to go. And we went out to finish it up, and the wind had taken the tree and had fallen. And we couldn't, we said, it's not worth doing again. So, but that's...
So you never went to school here?
No.
When you were here in the summers, did you get to rub elbows with the summer people at all?
Some.
And how would that occur?
Most of mine were positive. I was of the generation that didn't have issues like the previous generation did. I think Hazel Vogler had the best line I've ever heard. We never knew we were poor until the summer colony came, because they could afford to have a second house and so forth. But we found out that life, because I know my mother worked for the Eckes family up at High Pines. And she worked there for 5 years for the Eckes family. Now, Mrs. Eckes and Mrs. Lillian Poling were sisters, and they were from the Diebold Safe Company. That's where they had the money. And it was interesting because I worked at the Driscolls for the 5 years as well, from 50, my last year was 58. But one Sunday I was at church correcting my mistakes after the service that I had played that day. And this woman came in and said, my mother was married here, and we lived at High Pines. I said, you must be one of the Eckeses. And she said, yes, how did I know? Because my mother knew there were 2 sisters, Mary Jane and Dorothy. Beautiful girls. And of course the family had money, they had a tennis court and so forth. So it was interesting for my mother to see that part of life that she'd never been exposed to.
And that was that place you're talking about, the Eckers place, is in Deering?
It's a Driscoll farm.
Oh, the Driscoll farm.
Yeah. And, but the funny part was, my mother noticed it, and I said it to her sometime later, she seemed that the groom was there as well. This was just before the wedding. And he seemed to be spending more attention with not the sister he was going to marry, but the other one. But the marriage went through, and later on, they divorced. And he married the other sister. So that must have been some interesting conversations going on. Okay. But the ironic part was he died, and both sisters ended up living together for the rest of their life, which I think was just kind of interesting.
Do you play a musical instrument?
I play a little bit of piano. I used to be the fill-in organist on the 5th Sunday of the month at the Deering Church. And I always said I'm going to carry a bucket with me when I go to play. It'll be for the notes I miss and the mistakes I make. And but it was, as Stuart would say, we're going to be out of here very quickly today. So that was what I would do.
When did you fill in? When was this?
I did it for about 5 years, but only if there was a 5th Sunday of the month. And
recently?
No. I haven't been going to church.
When was the last time you did the organist thing, the fill-in? What years?
Probably 10 years ago,
Okay. Yeah.
even less.
Yeah. Describe what it was like decorating the chandeliers at the Deering Church.
The first thing I never knew was that they could be lowered. And I would get that big step ladder, and I had to take the globes off, wash them, and put the bows on them. And then I think it was a couple of years, and I said, this darn ladder is so high and wobbly. And Whit said, the chandeliers can be lowered. So I went up in the attic and found out there's a crank. You can lower them. And then that first time I lowered them, I didn't realize there was no mark on the cable as to how far I'd gone. And I looked through the peephole, and the chandelier was on its side. But nothing had fallen off, so I had to crank it back up again. So I put a piece of tape on the cable to know when I'd gotten to the point I should stop.
That church was transformed every time after you decorated it.
I've got a photograph album of them that I'm going to give to the church. I think I might give them to the historical more than. That was something I loved doing. I did it for quite a few years. Whit Yapel and Beverly used to do it before. And he asked me to do it at one time when they weren't going to be here. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I love doing it. I just don't have the energy to do it now. I used to go over to, under the power lines, there was a lot of wonderful balsam. And I'm trying to think, I think the man's name was Olson that owned that piece of land. And he let me go in every year and I filled my wagon 2 or 3 times with balsam, take it to the church and do the I had a friend, Cliff Blanchard in Hillsborough, made a lot of the forms that I needed for either wreaths or other angled pieces. So, but it was interesting. It was fun. I enjoyed seeing people's faces when they would walk in. That was my pleasure of doing that, and also my mother and I started making the food because we used to ask people to bring food, and I said, it's kind of hard to ask people to bring food if you're coming to the service. We're going to provide it. So I would make 26 loaves of bread, sandwiches. And I remember getting the compliment from Leo Vogan. He always would eat my sandwiches because Leo was very fussy about food. And he wanted to know if it's hot or cold. And he said, anything you prepare, he said, Tom, I will eat. And that made me feel good.
Do you remember the Mooney's Christmas parties?
Oh, yes.
Wasn't that special?
Yes. Dick and Nancy were good people.
That was my first taste of what you could do, of real community and caring.
Yeah.
And they opened their doors to a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Almost everybody.
Yeah.
And then Stuart and Suzanne followed up for several years with a Christmas party.
Yeah.
Was Deering Church an important part of your summer?
Very much so. Not that when I was a child, after I became a resident, I think I became a member in the 70s as well. And then I became active. I was a trustee. I was a deacon. I was a financial secretary, treasurer, for quite a few years. After Whit stopped doing it.
And let's say, trying to think of 1950 to were the summer people still involved in the Deering Church at that point?
Yes. It's funny because at one time the Deering Church had a label as a country club church. Even to the point some members of my family said they didn't feel they were welcome in their own church because of the summer colony. I mean, it was the summer colony that got the impetus to get it restored. So we have to take that into consideration. But it was, issues against people that had money and not having money in the town. I think one of the things that I remember my grandmother telling me, because they had dances all the time, anything from just before the First World War and all during the 20s and the 30s, there were dances almost weekly at the town hall. Many times they would be square dances, and sometimes it would be regular. I remember there was one orchestra that my grandmother liked, was called Juanita, and it came out of Hillsborough, as far as I know. And they were wonderful, because the town hall back then, it was very small. When you look at the hall and you see the break in the floor, and you see the stage was only like maybe 6 feet, but it was enlarged in the 30s due to the community club. That's when they really started having many of the dances. But it was funny, I remember one time my grandmother saying, when the summer colony would go to the dances, they would go off by themselves. And when they had the square dance, they would have sets by themselves. So my grandmother went up to the caller one time and says, we have a problem that, they're not mixing. So there's a very good way. There was a dance that they put all the men in the outer circle, they put the women in the inner circle, and you walk and different things, and you end up having a new partner. And he made sure that there was mixing. And it was probably one of the first times they had mixing, it was quite beneficial at that point.
And dances were pretty important, weren't they?
Very much so, because it was the only outlet that they had. And if it wasn't for the community club, I gave all the records to the town of the community club. It had their checkbook and all the things they did for people. I remember they sent out monthly or weekly allowances to a number of people in town that had no money. They would send flowers to people at funerals, and they paid for the extension of the town hall. And I had the checkbook to show that they did do that. So it was very vital. The place was packed every night. This was before my time, but my mother said it was the greatest thing going. And there was always questions as to, was there drinking going on? And someone even contacted the state thinking there was some carousing going on. But in reality, they came and checked and said it was the best thing they have ever seen. It was civic pride and getting people, especially during the Depression, where people had no money. All the families, as Hazel said to me, we didn't know we were poor, everyone except one family, and that would have been Ben and Abby Bartlett. They were the only ones that had money, but they lived worse lives than the regular townspeople because they were so frugal. But it was an opening for people. They paid, I think dues were something like 10 or 15 cents a month. And from that, they developed a kitty that would be there to help people. And those records are out at the town hall in the file cabinet.
Go back to the, you said that there was cattle here.
Yes, Aberdeen Angus.
How many head?
When my grandfather died in 1953, I think there were 18. At one time, he had up to about 45 to 50. And I think he started them about 1912. And I think at that time, he would probably have been the second or third person in New Hampshire to have Angus. I do have some of the original certification slips for some of the names were like Princess Star of Deering, Calantha of Deering. And it was funny, about 20 years ago, I got a call from someone out, I want to say Idaho or something, who had cattle that had come from, and he was looking for a number, certificate number. And I looked up, and I had that certificate for that critter. And I was able to give the number because they were registered through the Aberdeen Angus Society.
Were they able to make a living off the cattle, or is that part
No, it was, you had to do a lot of everything. During the winter, they cut wood. He had a man working for him named Louis Bisonet, who lived where the bridge is, down below here. And they cut wood during the year. And also, during the 30s, they cut poplar because they sold wood to the Clement's Toy Factory and the other ware factory. They would sell poplar. It had to be a certain length, certain diameter, because they made toys out of it. They made these little wagons. And there was, I think one of the companies there had an office in New York where they had, as I say, toy hay wagons and sleds and so forth that they made. and could sell. But they like poplar because it's straight grained and will take paint.
What about any other kind of husbandry?
Well, you grew everything yourself as well. I know my grandfather, even the year he died in 53, he had planted half an acre of potatoes in the bottom field. And my mother and I took care of them because I do not like that kind of gardening. And I think I would go along every third plant and, when I was trying to hill them. But he used to have people come and buy a row of potatoes and they would come and dig them themselves. That way you could do that.
As we look out the window today, how close is the landscape related to 1950s?
It's unbelievable. I used to be able to see Bartlett Farm from here. It was so open. I could see the two Tiffany houses. You can still see them every once in a while. There are some clearings up there. I know there's certain times of the year when it looks like the upper Tiffany house is on fire because the sun hits the windows and it gives you this funny image.
Can you tell me where the pinnacle is?
Wait, what?
The pinnacle is.
It's at the top of Gove Hill.
And what's up there?
It actually was a mine, if you wish, because they cut ledge there, and it's just the end of the hill, and there used to be a road up through the fields, go through Gary Smith's house. There was a gateway, and it went up to the pinnacle where they cut ledge. I remember Chuck Gatis was up there one time with a group, and he told me the type of ledge it was. It's a hard type of ledge, and you can see where they would cut it along the seams and take ledge because they use it to make foundations. And so during World War II, they used to use it for spotting airplanes. Because I know Clara Rich had a big map, I would call it, and what it was views of airplanes looking from down up to the plane. So they had people on the pinnacle at night watching for planes during the war.
How important is the pinnacle to you?
Very much. Actually, when I'm gone, I want part of my ashes to go there. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to save the pinnacle by putting all of the property into conservation easement. That was very important to me because my grandmother used to say the thought of houses all through this, because I had been talking with a developer, David Titcomb. He wanted to put in 22 houses. And I said, I don't think so. Just not one thing I wanted to do. But all of the land here is in a conservation easement. The only piece I kept out was a lot I sold to Gary Smith. My cousin, Peter, took a piece of land when his mother died. And so it was my mother, my aunt, and myself that owned the property.
Was Pete Zukas? Is that?
Yes.
Didn't he frame the house across the street?
Yes.
Did he ever get to live there?
No.
No.
No, because he lived in Henniker. He married Priscilla. I can't think of her maiden name, but she's related to the people that own the Pat's Peak. And when his mother died, he got that piece of land to settle her estate.
Who owns the little field in the corner of...
Peter does. What we call the schoolhouse field. Peter does. It's a funny lot because at the top of the schoolhouse hill, where you see the walls are, the line goes through the top part of that little field and cuts across the Glen Road, and there's a funny triangular piece down there that crosses into that lot.
What's it like living on the bottom of a pretty steep hill?
You're better at the bottom than the top.
What have you seen over the years?
I've seen Keith many times. I still joke that how we used to watch traffic at night. And because the road was changed dramatically in the 50s. Because the road used to go along the maple trees. And there was a right-hand turn on the top. And during the 50s, they wanted to raise the whole road 18 feet So and cut up, and so we said no, we were going to fight that. But then they changed it to do straight, and then they had to do it again. They had to dig it down deeper because it was hard for the bus. But the other road was, and in the process of changing the road, they took out a well. There used to be a well. It's right in the middle of the road. And I remember a number of years later, it was wonderful because one of the town trucks went down into the well, and I think it tipped over. But I think it was the curse of the well saying they promised they were going to put another well in because we had watering troughs out front. And the troughs were thought that anyone with horses could use them. And if you look in the old town reports, you'll see that they got paid $3 a year for allowing people to use the watering troughs. There was a smaller one. There was a bigger one. He bought one after Abby Bartlett died in 21. He bought the one that they had that was huge. And we could almost get in, but it was all that gunk in it. But the water was kept running all the time from the well. Just like my well is about 700 feet from the house. And it used to take care of 3 watering troughs and the house. The water ran continually.
So it's a spring.
It's a spring. It was only about 8 feet deep, and we had it dug deeper because it used to silt up a lot. And my cousin Raymond did it. He dug it 14 feet deep, 14 feet across, put crushed rock and the cement tiles and filled in. And he told me it was going to take 3 days to fill up. I went the next morning, it was filled. And then I pumped it out and put in, I think, 3 or 4 gallons of bleach and pumped it out over the next week. And it's been my source. And I even keep it running now because some of the pipe is not that far below the ground, so I just leave some running in the cellar under the shed. So
how does it taste?
It's good. I'm still alive. Hasn't killed me yet.
Yeah.
But we did have lead pipes before. And it was funny when I remember as a child, in the early morning, my grandmother said, don't drink yet. She would turn the spigot on and let it run for quite a while. So they must have known something that there was some problem with lead.
Or there was a tang in the water they wanted to get rid of and they didn't know, but whatever.
Of course, a couple of you turn the faucet and come out, half a worm would come out, and you figure there must be the rest of it somewhere along. But it never affected us. It never killed us. And
when you were young, how old were you in the 50s when you were here?
I was born in 40.
Okay. That was during a certain time, a transition time, I think, in Deering, between more people having automobiles.
Yes.
Did everyone have an automobile?
No, my grandfather never had a vehicle. He still worked with horses. He was the last one to work with horses until 53, because he would have killed himself on a tractor. He would never have been able. Actually, he worked with horses when he was in Scotland. I've got a picture of him and the family he worked with the last year, and he saved that money to come to. He saved, I think it was $50 to come to America. And it was interesting. It's like the old days when they took photographs. Even in Scotland, they would get every horse you owned and line them up. And it's like here when they took early photographs, they would bring the horse and the buggy out, and people would dress up so that they could just show that we're civilized and that we're doing okay.
It was well.
Yes, it was a way of doing it. But he was big with horses, and he spent money on horses, and he always wanted decent horses. And there were 2 horses at the end. One was Tom, the other was Dick. And one was big and one was smaller. And Tom, when the load was heavy, he would strain and Dick would prance. When the wagon was empty, Tom would just go and Dick would be straining. And so it seemed to be just complete opposites. But he was good with horses. And behind the door there, I have the pole that held the reins in the old hay wagon. I saved that when the barn went down at August 20, 1968. I crawled down because my mother said, get that, because it was a piece of wood that had a piece of a small tree. And he used to wrap the reins on and hold on. But I saved that.
Let's talk about that weather incident.
August the 20th, 1968. We knew there was something going on because I was in Manchester. And I was down by Merrimack Common. And at that time, there was the most enormous wooden flagpole. The base of it must have been 2 to 3 feet. It went up, and there was another piece added to it and went up. And I saw it get struck by lightning. And the pieces flaring off from there were like pieces of 2x4. And they were spread all over the common. But the color of the sky towards this area was unbelievable. It was a very nauseous-looking color. It almost made you sick to look at it. And then we got the phone call saying, did anyone call you? And I said, no, the tornado had hit here. And took the barn, all the trees in the yard. And the roof opened up of the house. And you can see there's a little dip in it. And when it fell, fortunately it stopped in time because it fell back in place. And when the rafters came back, they were about that far apart because of the big nails. So they had to brace the attic. But the chimney was broken. The electrical on the first floor was pulled out of the sockets. There was a big rug in the front room. And we had at that time a square grand piano. And in the middle of the room was a table with a big oil lamp on it, one of those Gone with the Wind lamps, in the middle on the rug. The rug was in the front hall. The table with the lamp was still standing. And so we had things like that. About 7 windows blew out in the house. And it's probably what saved the house.
What was your reaction when you first came back to life?
My mother, she cried. She cried so much because, we came at night and you could see with a flashlight. You could only see what the flashlight showed you. We didn't see a total until the next morning. We got up here at 6 o'clock and I got to the corner of the field and we just stopped. We had to get out of the car. We just couldn't believe it. It was just like a basket had just fallen off the barn. Was 100 feet long and maybe 40 feet wide. And it took the shed down as well. And the corn barn, the hen houses, and all the maples. And there were 8 big maples. And you can see in that picture that maples are there. But it was funny because my cousin was on his honeymoon. And he left his truck in the front yard. His truck went over the trees. The maple and the trees fell on his truck, so you can see the power. My Aunt Annie was here, and she was holding the front door casing. The whole thing was moving, and her car was turned around, and she had an antenna on it, and it looked like a frizzy hair. It was all curlicued. There was a box of bottles that I had been sorting up in the attic, and that window went out, and I found the box down in the field. Nothing broken. When you see stuff like that, it's just... We did one beam from the barn came through this L roof and into the little bedroom upstairs. And it was sticking out. It did... but the house was still standing, so...
How long did it take to clean up?
I would say almost years, because we did it mostly by hand. Because we had very little insurance on the property. And they wouldn't, I think we had $6,000 worth of insurance on it. But we were left, because all the roofs of the house were off. But one thing I will say about David Titcomb, he brought his crew here the next day. He redid all the roofs of the main house and the L. So that because they had, I think, 5 good days of weather. And he gave us a bill just for materials and not for labor. So he's helped save the house for us. And for that, I will be eternally grateful to him.
That's a great story.
But it was a rude awakening. But when you look around, it's hard to envision that something like that happened.
It's like a timber cut. When people see a timber cut, they're not used to it.
They freak out.
And I just wait a few years.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Yeah, you just, but it does heal, but it made a difference. And the chimneys were knocked out, and we had to get power, and they were going to hook the power, and we said, "Oh, please don't," because even on the first floor, the sockets and the wire was out of the boxes.
Did kind of switch gears here? Did the topography or transportation in general, did that delineate who you could have friendships with in terms of getting to see people? Were you sequestered being here? Did you hang out up the hill at all?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yes.
That didn't bother you.
No. Because when I think back in the summers, I know every weekend there were people here. And my grandmother's brother and his wife and his son and daughter-in-law, they came for 2 weeks every year, even though we had no conveniences. We didn't have indoor plumbing. They still came. It was, I tell people, they say indoor plumbing. And so I said, if the outhouses were good enough for George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, it's sure and heck going to be good enough for us.
Why do you think they came here?
Because my grandmother's brother came because he was 20 years younger than my grandmother. And he spent all of his summers up here with her. And he still loved the place. That's why, I knew from the time that I was a teenager that I wanted to live here. And when I got my first job teaching, I knew I wouldn't have a family. Because I got my first job and I was paid $6,500 a year. So, but I knew I still wanted to live here. And of course, my mother always said, don't forget, she said, I have 4 siblings and you have 9 cousins. And things did work out, though.
Why did you want to live here?
I wanted to do work on the house that my grandparents couldn't do. I wanted to fix it up. Because I think it partly goes back to the summer colony. When there were meetings of the guild, for example, they would go to different houses. I don't think my grandmother ever had she had some meetings here, but because we didn't have indoor plumbing and so forth, it was kind of awkward. But we still kept on going, and there was always family here. We have photographs on the front steps, and it was not unusual to have 10 people over the weekends during the spring, summer, and fall. We were all here one time, and I remember I asked Meg Ager a while back what the date was when her family home burned in 1945. The whole family was here. And Rosie Colburn, whose family owned the Colburn store, came down in a truck. She had been visiting Hazel and said, Rob's place is on fire. So everyone got in their vehicles and drove. Rob owned the house down across from where the Stankies lived. And because we were so young, Mars was not, Jim, Donald and David and I and Peter, we went up to the pinnacle and we could watch the house burn. We could see the column I never forgot that column of smoke. The hay barn had started and it went into the house, but they got everything out of the house on the first floor. And because our old place was empty, my mother and her 2 sisters went up and started scrubbing the house so that Rob would have, and they were able to set up all the rooms for the kids and so forth. And they even took the cook stove out of the house while it was still burning. I think when you get that super energy, it's like those automobile accidents where people all of a sudden lift the car up. And but they got everything out, got everything set up. And they got the ones, when they saw Ruth Lawson was coming, who was my grandaunt, they stopped her and said, the only thing that was very sad about, there were 2 horses that were in the barn. And my mother said she never forgot that sound of the horses screaming. But there's no way to get in to save them. And we found, remember, the next day we went up to look and you could see the skeletons and there was still with the chains around the halters. But it was a reality, fires were the most, were a very common thing. But it was a sweet little house. My mother said it was very cute. My great grandparents bought it at one point to have as a summer place, and then they sold it to their son Rob Lawson. Do you remember Andy Lawson?
Yes.
Rob Lawson was his father. Rob married Ruth Davy. The only thing is, Rob was 35 years older than Ruth. But they had a slew of kids. And they had Bobby. They had the twins, Meg and Andrew, James, and Charlotte. Meg is, and I think Charlotte is alive, of that family. But they were very close to the family here. It's funny, I've got some spoons in there. If you get some coffee, those are the spoons my granddaughter Rob Lawson gave to my grandmother for her wedding. So it was kind of, interesting. That was the time, talk about community getting together to solve and help situations.
So it was tragedy was one way.
Yeah.
And socially it was...
Yeah. But it was something that people did, If all the people had not been here that day, it would have been a different story. They would have lost everything.
And whose house burned again?
Rob Lawson's. It's where Deanna Clint lived. And it did burn to the ground.
Well, that's a name from the past, Deanna Clint.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, about 4 years ago, I see that Russ Clint had died.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, but didn't mention Deanna, so I'm assuming that she...
Back in Minnesota.
Yeah. No, he died in Massachusetts.
He did?
Yeah. I was very surprised.
Huh. I thought they moved back to Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. But I think they were there for a number of years.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But these stories that, some things we can remember.
Memorable people, Tom, who were locals.
Ruth Ethel Clement Farr. Have you read a copy of the Dandelion in Winter?
Not yet.
I've got another extra copies I'll give you. I gave you one, right? She was the most interesting character in that she held a mortgage to this place. My grandfather had wanted to buy what they call the Bailey lot. It's where Dennis Carbonaro lives. It was a small, but it had some nice timber, and I think he had $50 to his name. And Ruth Ethel came up to my grandfather and said, I think the place is going to go reasonable. I'll give you a mortgage if you want it. And so he bought it. And up there on the wall is the mortgage deed. He borrowed from Ruth Ethel $2,800 and to buy this place with 150 acres. But I always tell people, he didn't whip out a checkbook, and it took him 30 years. And on the back of that is all the payments he made. It was a 5% note, so it was $140 a year in cash. Thank goodness it was Ruth Ethel, because there were a number of years they didn't pay during the Depression. And sometimes they made minimal payments because no one had money. They had, $10, $20 or something like that. But big sums like that, no one had that. But they lived well because they grew everything they had. Food-wise, I was telling someone that when we cleaned out the cellar after my grandmother died, I think we took over 1,000 canning jars to the dump. And because we used to go pick blueberries with a water pail. Because we had a pasture up there. Your family used to go a lot. And we used to get probably 5,000-6,000 quarts a year. But they high bushed the wild berries. And of course, they were so thick, you taste them first to make sure that bush was sweet enough. And then you would pick it. But then you would can it. Of course, that was the problem. All this canning had to be done during the summertime when it was hot. And I remember the last year my grandmother died, actually the year before, I think we did 400 quarts of blueberries. We'd go up and pick, walk up. been trying to walk up the hill, but I'm having trouble with my legs. But like I haven't been up to the pinnacle this year. Kirk, the fellow that helps me here, is going to go up with me as soon as the snow is gone. So I'm just kind of afraid of falling. I'm at that stage where I have to be very careful. So
I understand. When you went up to the pinnacle, or when you go up again, describe the feeling up there.
it's hard because we used to play up there all the time. There's one place where there's a piece of the ledge is missing, and there's a lot of little rocks around the top, and that was our make-believe campfire. Because the cattle would be up there too, so you had to be very careful. Because I don't know, if you watch the show, The Incredible Dr. Paul, he'll tell you, don't ever trust an Angus. You know, we were terrified of them when we were little kids, because they were really pretty mean and nasty. And especially when you walk into the barn, and you know, when they had all the hay wagons and the mowers in the barn, you had to walk very close to the cattle itself, and of course, you might get thrown up against the wagon or something like that. But they were kind of ugly critters, but they managed. It was always interesting to watch them when he would call in the afternoon. You could hear them be up at the pinnacle, and they would come down through the lane, and it was all rock, and you could hear them running until they would get to the barn, and you had to get the grain out, so they would come in. They were really ready to go through the stanchions to get at the grain, because he had all these little wooden boxes that you could put a couple cans of grain in each one. But it's just that running up, down, that I can still hear that sound of them running.
How would he call them?
I don't know what he actually said now. That's an interesting point. I think he would just yell something. And, but they for some reason, they would hear him, and they knew it meant grain and food. And because the barn had a addition on the side where you could go into the barn, and you could also go down to the cellar, because the cellar had a watering trough. And they could go down when they wanted to, when they were in the barn, and get drink, and then come upstairs. But I remember I used to like the smell of the barnyard. I remember the year my grandfather died in 1953. My grandmother said, I miss the barnyard smell. So my mother contacted the Orcoin family, who were cutting the fields for it, and she ordered a small truckload of cow manure to be dumped in the cow yard. Because it brought that, you know, there's a wonderful, cow yard smells are wonderful smells. And it's earthy, it's stuff going on. And so it just...
So you're up at the pinnacle, and you're standing there.
You can see so far.
You can what?
You can see so far, you know, and it's just... we used to play up there all the time. Cowboys and Indians. It was quite open then.
What are you saying?
I used to be able to see the Tiffany houses. We could see. I remember as a kid, I could see the barn from the pinnacle. You know, and I've got some pictures showing the view from the pinnacle to the barn, and it was just as open, because it was the cattle that kept it down. And you know, that's the thing. When you see things growing up, I think that's the one thing that's scares me the most in that is when I see fields growing up. And I know some fields around, and you drive by and you say, I hope they're going to at least cut them. And every time I go by the Wormsley place, I say, I hope they're going to keep that cut. Because that's so important. Because at some point we might have to grow crops here. Richard Crane. Yeah. He had a job with the state about land use. He had an office in Milford. And they have maps of all the open lands. So let's say California slides off. We're going to have to grow things here. And they know where all these fields are. So they can start to get produce going and food going. So it's there. It's that's why they know every field that's around, because they had these aerial photographs. And he showed me the maps.
Fields are important. Why is the Pinnacle important to the town of Deering, the people of Deering?
Because it was something you could get to easily. I took Margaret Colvin up there on her 100th birthday because she taught at the North School her first year in Deering. And she would take her children, the students, up for lunch at the Pinnacle. And she wanted to go, and I remember her son Chetty came with us, and there was someone else with us. And I remember we had a folding chair in case Margaret had to sit. She made it without, I was the one that was looking to sit down at some point. And she would tell us about the stories. And of course, Margaret Colburn to me was one of the finest. She died when she was 107 on her birthday. Sharp as a tack till the end. I used to go to see her every Wednesday when she was in the nursing home. And sharp as a tack. She was the first person that knew me up here when I was 2 weeks old. Because when Mother and my father brought me up to show me, they stopped, they saw Margaret and Chester outside. And Margaret was the first one to hold me up here. So that's why I've had such a long good relationship with Margaret. I used to bring her muffins from the pancake house. She used to love muffins and blueberry muffins.
Which seems to be in mothballs at the moment and for sale.
What?
Patrick's, the Pancake House.
Yes.
It's I hope no one's sick.
Well, I understand his point. He wants to travel while he's still able.
Okay.
Because he only takes a couple days off a year.
Hard-working kid.
And Patrick is wonderful. I had a wonderful chat with, because I've been going there for over 20 years. They even have a computer key for Uncle Tom, for me. Because then it's the same price it was 15 years ago for my waffle and sausage and coffee.
Great people, bright kids too.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
The daughter is wonderful. And I understand his point, He's had a number of people kicking tires, sort of. Most of them don't have the money. But I understand his point. While he's still able to get around, he wants to get a trailer and travel all around the country.
Well, maybe it'll take a year to get that out of the system.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to hope that. Because, again, it's going to be change.
Yeah. Well,
and as you know, I am no good with change.
However, you are a historian with a capital H, and you have such a connection to this town and the people that formed this town and the ways of life. Why do you think that's important for people in Deering?
Just like I worked on the election, and I really love that. Even though it's a 14, 15-hour day, to me it's like all home day. And someone came up to me and said, how come you're hugging these people?
You were talking about working the election.
Yes, and to me, seeing all these people, unfortunately, you see them in a decline. And, I came home and I sat in that chair, and I was really quite sad because I saw people who were vigorous, years ago, and see them, and I realized I'm in that same position myself. But it's that continuity and that connection with people. I've been very fortunate in there's a line in the book in the side. It says, I wish you could have known the people I knew. I put that line in because that's the thing that, I have treasured the people I've known. And I don't care what part of town, what income or anything, doesn't make a difference. It's just that it's this continuity of seeing people that I have seen for years. But I see them now in decline, which is very sad in a way.
When you say you see them now in decline, is that because you've reached a certain notch in your assessment of your historical perspective?
I think so, yeah.
And, but there are more chapters to come.
Not many. I don't know. I don't know how long. I know I've got to get things caught up and get out of the house here because I worry a lot that if something happens to me, there are a lot of things that I need to go through and get out, which is going to be this summer's work, is to get everything out of the house to get it to where it belongs.
When you say everything out of the house, what kind of things?
Stuff that relate to the town.
Well, one of my cherished memories is working with you at town meeting, counting votes.
Oh, yes.
For the ballot votes.
Oh, and we were sitting, and he mentioned one time, Keith mentioned that I had no expression on my face when we did the count. Because I counted and you counted, and if you remember how many votes? 3 votes.
Yes, and what maybe people didn't know is that you and I were having a running commentary on what was going on and what was being said.
Yeah.
That was one of the best memories of my life.
Well, the thing is, and of course that's to Michelle's credit. If it weren't for Michelle, that town hall would have not been fixed. Because I don't know, I've told Michelle this, I don't know if I told you that. I got a call from Jimmy Carew a few days before the election, the town meeting. And he was opposed to them fixing the town hall. He wanted them to build a new town hall up on the hotel lot. And I remember saying to him, Jimmy, they can't take care of this one. How are they going to build a new one and take care of the one we've got? He said, well, I think I want to go speak against it. And I said, Jimmy, you can ask the moderator. I said, personally, I wish you wouldn't do it. And he didn't show up. And I thank my stars, because Jimmy would have easily convinced a few people, because he was a very important character to the town.
He was. Do you remember Ed Dutton?
Oh, God, yes. Eddie was one of my dearest friends, from way back when. Because he was on the National Bicentennial Committee when we did the history book. And we spent 2 years taping people, I think 4 years at 80's dining room table, going over Evangeline's sermon, which we had to say, you are not writing a sermon. And I remember it was the first time I saw the word dichotomy, and I didn't know what it meant. So I go get my dictionary and find out what it meant. So we had to convince her to, make it simpler language. If there's one thing I'm thrilled about, is my participation with the book. I did all the pictures on it, and I got some of the text done as well. But it was, it's a good, if anything I want to be remembered for, it would be for that book. That we got it at the time. It was the right time, because we still had people. We had Pat Morse, even though he lived in Henniker, Walter Dutton, and many others. We heard one story that I'd like to repeat. Lillian McNally, her son owned the Tasker store in Hillsborough, I think. George. There's another story there, but I won't tell it. But Lillian was telling us that at one time, this is when I'm amazed how things get around towns. She was saying at one point, because there were 2 last Go sisters, were Hannah Jane and Lizzie. And they were both great-great-granddaughters of Ocean-born Mary of Henniker. And she was telling us at one time, she used the term a slave living here. And I had not heard it, but she said the strange thing was he sort of was interested in one of the 2 sisters. My mother knew both of the sisters when they were very elderly. But then he disappeared, and no one ever saw him leave. And she said at the same time, they filled in a well in a building. And I'm sitting there, because I know what building they're talking about, and the well. And how would she have known? And there's a rock there, it's about this big. How did they ever get this size rock inside of a building to fill a well in? If you're going to fill a well in, you're going to use small debris and so forth. But it was in the original building, you can see in that old photograph, it was a huge 2-story shed. And it has a blacksmith's thing in the corner, and they had the well in there. And there was also ox harness. Like there was on, just below, going on the Audubon Road, there was an old blacksmith shop there. I remember seeing pieces of leather. You know, when you go up on towards, you're getting at the top of Sodom Hill, you go past, and you go up towards the Audubon land. There's a field there that John Dawson owns, and just below that was the blacksmith shop, because they had, you could still see the leather straps from shoeing oxen, because with oxen they can't bend their legs, so you have to lift them up to shoe them. I got a couple of shoes up in the attic where they had to, because they had that cloven hoof, so they had to lift them up in order to shoe them.
I didn't know they shoed oxen. That's interesting.
Yeah.
When you said that you're talking about with the book that you participated, you're talking about Welcome Home.
Yes.
Okay. And you said that Walter Dutton was
interviewed.
Was he?
Yes. Walter Dutton with Pat Morse, and I forget who else. Pat Morse grew up in Deering at the, I don't know who lives there now, but you know when you go past, you know Pleasant Pond in Henniker? You know, there's a, you know, and then you turn onto what Quaker Street is. Just before that, you know, that's that big white house, Pleasant Pond Farm. That's where my grandparents spent their honeymoon there. It was owned by friends of my great-grandparents out of Wellesley. It was their summer place. But you go down that road, and it was a nice cape that's set back. Because I know during the 50s, it was owned by Jack and Jane Adams. They moved to Hopkinton. And I'm trying to think, there was that couple that lived there. I know the last ones I knew were the Hesplinks. And they're lovely, lovely people. But the Morses grew up in that cape. And, of course, the Morses were very part of Deering at that time.
Tom, how do you think it's important for residents of Deering to have at least a nominal connection to their history?
I think so.
How about people who moved here? What would you tell them if they want to succeed and really get the most out of Deering? What would you tell them?
Well, I would ask them first how you found it, how you came here, what brought you here. And it was funny because I remember even as a child, when I would talk to my grandmother, that was the one thing that was so wonderful for me. Spending my summers up here, after breakfast, we would sit and talk for at least an hour or two about everything. And she told me how she hated Deering at first. Because when she came up here in 1905, trust me, there was fewer than 300 people. And she came from Wellesley, Mass. And her family, they weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. But there were parties all the time. And you come up here, and you're out in the boondocks. And it was funny, the one time she had gone down to Massachusetts to bring Wallace to show to the family. She would go by train. She would go to North Ware Depot, and you could get the train down to Massachusetts. And when she was down in Massachusetts, Wallace became sick. And the doctor said, you know, I really don't think he's going to make it. I think you better go home. Well, she came home. They called. My grandparents didn't have a phone, but there was a phone here. So they called Hannah and Lizzie and said, send your man up to tell my grandfather to come and pick her up at the station the next day. And as she was in the buggy coming home, she got by Lake Horace, and all of a sudden Wallace started to perk up. And it got a little bit further along, and it got better. And, you know, he was fine the next day. So she realized at that point, this is home. This is important. That, you know, she could accept it at that point. But that would have been, and let's see, Wallace was born in 2009.
Wallace Wood.
Yes. And look
Wallace Wood. And Dorothy Parker?
Yes.
Oh, Wallace and Dorothy.
Yes.
Oh, special people.
Oh, Wallace had the most incredible memory of anyone. And he worked the hardest. He's the one that did all the digging out of the Dinner Center Church of the cellar and putting this concrete in there. He put all the concrete around the East Deering Church.
He was this high.
And when he was ill and dying, they had him in hospice. And they got him out because he was doing well. He was improving. And, I guess it was saying, like, that's not our mission to keep you. I go, this is. But he was still sharp till the end. His memory was, and it was the one time my grandmother said one time she never saw my grandfather cry, but when he got married and left, he cried because he said the baron is gone. Because there were 4 girls and 1 boy, and of course Wallace could do nothing wrong because his sisters loved him, and Wallace was one of the nicest people.
He talked about rolling the roads.
Oh yes, rolling, yeah.
Yeah.
They had the roller. I don't know if it's the original one. It used to be over by the airport that they used to roll. But before they used to actually break roads. And if you look through the old town report, they would talk about if you lived in an area, because I think at one time there were like 15 road agents, and you were responsible. I found the book that Rob Lawson had. He was a road agent from up there, and it showed his route. And he would break road, and by breaking road, they would take their horses out and walk the road, not plowing it or anything, just to break it so that, and if the more times you did it, the more the people could, so you could do a mile and someone else would do the next mile. But they got paid for breaking road. And if you look through the old town reports before 1925, you'll see where people were paid to break roads. So they could use sleighs. I never had a ride in a sleigh, but I would have, because they had a sleigh here. They had 2 of them, actually.
Are there things, Tom, or anything in particular that you miss that you just don't happen anymore?
I miss Old Home Day. The idea of getting together. I don't think people today can envision. I couldn't go until I was about 7 or 8 because they didn't want kids. And Edna Yape used to babysit for me when my folks went to the dances. And that town hall was so packed, you could barely move. It was, and it was funny, all the women dressed up. It was a very special occasion.
You think we could have another one?
No, that's the thing that's gone, unfortunately. You look at some town, what's that town, Nelson, where they still have the square dances. But I don't know how successful they are in going.
I think it's just...
But these dancing groups, because for quite a few years I taught Scottish country dancing in Hillsborough with a Hillsborough Band Scottish country dance group.
I was in high school and you were teaching.
Yes.
How many kids did you, how many years did you do it, first of all?
I think I did it for about 8 years. I did it before I went in the Army, and I did it when I came back. And at one point, we had 85 children. And it was started by Cliff and Dot Blanchard. They had lived in Bedford, New Hampshire, where there was the Bedford Hills Scottish Country Dance Group, started by Jack McKelvey. I've got all kinds of material I'm going to donate to the Bedford Historical Society and to Hillsborough Historical Society about the children, because we'd go down to the McKelvey School in Bedford for our annual party. And we actually got to the point we hired a dance band from Canada, Stan Hamilton. And it was a big thing, and the kids would go down there. We had refreshments. I bought 300 glass plates so the kids to use with receiving lines, and we had food for them. And people would say, why didn't you just get paper plates? How are you going to teach them the right way if you don't give them the things they're going to need? But we ended up doing poorly in that when the Blanchard started, they said if a girl wanted to go, she had to find a boy to do. And it got to the point there were more girls than boys. And it doesn't work when it's that way. You have to have an even number. And it sort of went by at that point.
I had friends who went to Scottish.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was really unique.
Oh, I see people come up to me and, are you? I used to know you.
Yeah, Mickey Grimes was one of them.
Yeah. And I've got pictures of some of these kids in kilts, because eventually you used to sell this peanut brittle, and I think it was from Cherrydale, if I'm not mistaken. And we would order it, and it would sell out. I mean, we sold one year 12,000 cans of peanut brittle, but we used the money to outfit the kids. We had complete outfits for the boys and girls.
You also bought the Cabot cheese for the Guild Fair.
Yeah.
Describe how that went down, where you got it.
Leo Miller used to buy the cheese for the fair, and when he stopped, I was not in a position to pay for it, but we used to order it. I used to get it out of a place in Massachusetts. I can't think of it. It was a wholesalers, and I used to go get that. And I went and bought a cheese knife and set up my little booth, and they still do it now. But I think they're using Grafton cheese now.
So, talking to you,
Yeah.
I have come to the conclusion that you have carried on a lot of traditions that
I
people
think so.
before you,
But a lot of them have stopped, though.
like
Vespers. What? And it's funny. I talked to Stuart about this because he never heard of a church not having a Sunday service in the morning, even though it was going to be Vespers. And even though it's what killed Vespers, in that people are not going to go back to church twice in one day. But it was time for me to finish anyway, because it was just getting too much work. And it was expensive in a way, but it was something I was willing to do. But it was a perfect ending, because, I have mixed emotions about the church. I have not attended for a long time, but I still pledge money because I want to have my memorial service there.
Does that worry you, being 83?
It does. I think of it, but I'm not worried about it. I think stuff happens, and you can't bubble wrap people. And
I think you're looking pretty good.
well, I don't do stupid things anymore. There was a time I'd go out and shovel off a roof, and trust me, hello, Kirk.
Yeah. So
I've got Kirk Gordon, who is Margaret Colburn's grandson. He's helped cut my lawn for over 20 years. And he does errands for me. We're going to clean the attic out this spring. And he has said, I'll take you any place you want to go for doctors and so forth. And between he and Kevin Cahill, I can stay here. And that's the main thing.
People who are considering buying property in Deering, buying a house in Deering, people you don't know, what would be your pitch to them to come to Deering?
That it's clean, it's open, and there are some wonderful people here. And there's some not so. Because we've seen history in town of people that have gone through and caused troubles. That's another book.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at the end of phase 1.
Okay.
That was great.
I have one more story. Would you like to have a story I can tell you?
Love to hear it. All right. That is a car door.
Car trunk.
Car trunk.
And it's got what in it?
Bullet hole.
Okay. In the late 40s, during a winter storm, a car was coming up the road and got stuck. And my grandfather went out to see, and they got out of the truck. Snow was that deep. They had just regular shoes on. And they were kind of rough. And they said, "You got a tractor to pull us out?" And he said, "No." And how about horses? No. And so he went in, he said, well, let's get the jack out or something. So they went and opened the trunk and didn't have the key. All of a sudden he pulls the trigger and shoots and gets the trunk open and pulls everything out. And so my grandfather finally came up to the house and he called Gordon Rich. Will you come? And because he was a police officer at that time. And he didn't come. But he eventually called the state police. Because at that time, they went down to the Cloutier's house. And they were having a meal there. And the police circled the house. It seems these were 3 prisoners from Deer Island in Massachusetts that broke away, escaped from the prison. They robbed a car, they robbed a store to get clothes, and the car they stole belonged to a coin collector. And the whole back of the trunk was full of boxes of coins. And so the state police finally circled the house, and there's Rita Clue flat on the floor when and they finally arrested them. But it was the funny part was the coin collector never came up to get his property because it was thrown all out of the car by the crooks. It was on. I'm having to admit, I got a box of coins that I did sell a few years ago out of that hoard, but he had $65,000 worth of coins. Now there are people in this town that got umpteen coins, and I'm not gonna even name names because I'm not sure. That's why something like this is a story.
Where are these coins scattered? Whereabouts were these coins scattered?
On the roadside.
Like right out here?
No, they're right halfway down on the right side. Huh? But it's been dug up many times, when they did the... I've gone and looked myself in
I
there.
don't know if the road crew was picking up coins.
I don't know. But because they were all in trays,
Ah,
that people were taking the whole tray.
wow. Amazing, huh?
Because I'm guessing a couple people that I knew about it took a whole... I remember there was one coin that I had. It was a silver coin this big. It had Isabella and Ferdinand. And I think it was 16 something. But I did sell it eventually. So I was selling hot merchandise.
What was the value of your fence?
I got $600 for it.
Holy shit. That's great. Well, it's found.
But it was stolen. But,
You didn't steal it.
Well, I was 8 years old.
There you go. All right. Well, then I absolve you.
That's...
Yeah. Well, real.